Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Steve Van Eiderstein. Thank you all for joining me tonight as I do the review for the third chapter of the book we are currently reading. And that book is I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. It is a book, I think, written in 1934, right at the origination of the first 12-step program, Alcoholics Anonymous, which bore the rest of the 12-step programs. I did the reading from the original print, time period printing of the book. I'm not actually sure of it. I think it's a first edition, but I'm not sure of the printing version. First, second, third. I think it's third, but I'm not entirely convinced of it. But you can also get this one. This is a facsimile reprint of the book, which just means it's pictures of the pages of the book. So we will be doing my analysis or my review of the third chapter, which is titled This Business of Meaning Well and Doing Badly. And I really love it. And this is a great book, and I'm glad to be able to be doing this. And I hope y'all are enjoying the content. I hope y'all are enjoying the videos. If you could go ahead, like and subscribe, and go ahead, like the Facebook page, check it out, and you'll get the most recent videos, notifications, and things like that. So I appreciate y'all, and thank y'all for joining and listening and watching. And I'm available on Spotify podcasts as well as Apple podcasts. So please go ahead, jump on, comment, take a listen. We also have the Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount Beatitudes review, as well as James Allen's As a Man Thinketh on this channel. So I invite you to check those out as well. There'll be links to them at the end, I'm sure. So let's go ahead and we'll get into it. This is a review of I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. It's the third chapter. The Business of Meaning Well and Doing Badly. And let's get right into it. With the first line was something that I found very relatable. It was, there comes a time to almost every man when he seems to die inside. And that time came to me. I think when I found my best guess about life served neither me nor my fellow any better than my first guess. So it's a state or it's a period in time where a man or a person becomes completely lost, and they start asking those existential questions of why and what's the point and why am I here and how am I supposed to move forward? Why even continue? This is in some literature is called the jumping off point, where you're looking at your life and it's everything you've accomplished in your life, and it starts to lose its value. We realize it's just things. You realize it's just you're just accumulating stuff, and it's not actually contributing to anything. So you start to actually question the stuff like, is this all there is? Right? In the first chapter here, he talked about one aspect, and then the second chapter he talked about another. And now he's come to a point of frustration. He's come to a point of just being lost, really. I have lost written down in here. And because the way he was living wasn't working. The first way, to restate it, what I first thought was the point of living wasn't my best guess at the point of living. So first thought, first chapter, best guess, second chapter, neither of them seemed to work out, right? Then that's the best I could do. So what am I going to do? So it's it's hopeless, and that's the emotion that surrounds that. And I was at that point in my own personal life, right, where it's what's the point to keep on going? This is to be completely candid, this is a place that people get to, and suicide becomes a very prevalent thing, and it's something that needs to be acknowledged, right? Like this sense of lost and hopelessness and despair that can come up here because we can't just seem to get a handle on life happens to many people. And some people don't make it out. Many don't make it out, actually. Some people are stuck in the suffering. Some people take matters into their own hands. He says here, I intended, of course, to go right on living. Like he didn't see the point in how he was living, but he didn't make an effort to change how he was living either, right? Nothing in his life had changed. That's what he was saying in the last chapter. He had this book that he was so excited about, and you got to go. The purpose of life is to grow a soul. And that was all he had. He had knowledge. He had the ideas in his head that was what we should be doing. But what did it do for him? Nothing. It did nothing for him. It didn't change his life at all. So he talks about here, he just went right on living. Didn't change his habits at all. He didn't change how he interacted with people. He kept drinking. He kept doing whatever he was doing. And once in a while, I like how he said, I might even try an occasional but unenthusiastic fling at revising my book, though I felt that anything I wrote now would just be a lot of claptrap, just juggling of words, building of illusions, which had no place in the drab reality of life. Everything was pointless. Even his motivation was gone for the positive impact he wanted to make on others and to help people change their lives. And he realized, I haven't changed mine. How am I supposed to help to change theirs, right? And then he talks about reading this book, Spirit F. Standing's book, Spirit and Evolution. And now we're getting into this part where he starts realizing there's going to be, it's an educational thing here, right? So Standing's book, however, suggested that to be spiritual, one had to be far more than just well-meaning and intelligent, right? So he gets a little bit of guidance to say, hey, if you want to grow a soul, you can't just have the knowledge that you want to. You can't have the knowledge that's a good idea, right? And have good intentions, right? That's just stuff held in your brain. It's just intellectual pride that you're actually functioning on right there. And that's what he ended the last chapter with, actually, was that sense of that knowledge just wasn't enough, right? And he just found a book that states that as well. Standing's book, however, suggested that to be spiritual, so this is a new quality we're kind of introducing here, one had to be far more than just well-meaning and intelligent. Then he goes on to what he thought serving God meant. I had always thought that serving God meant doing the best I knew in using the talents God gave me. And that was what I called being creative in life. I thought that was interesting. And he lists his talents. My talents, I believed, were analytical, philosophical, and literary. Like, so these are all talents of the mind, all thought processes, all intellectual capabilities, right? And he's saying here, I thought me exactly who I am, using my God-given skill set, is just doing the best I can with good intention, right? It's not, he had no thought to change himself or to do better. He just was under the impression that serving God was to take what he had and do the best that he could with it, regardless of what that looked like, right? So we're getting started here. So what spirituality is, what being of service to God is, these things are changing. He said he was going through the book, Soul Qualities, and then he had this line: soul qualities are not, after all, mental qualities, right? Seems obvious, but many people confuse intellectual qualities and mental qualities, as he stated there, with spiritual and moral qualities. Knowledge of moral qualities is not the same as having moral qualities, right? These are not, there's some big distinctions here. And he's starting to realize this. He's starting to put it into words. They are moral qualities of character. Unlike the materially big man, the spiritually big man is not dependent on worldly influence, dominance, and social prestige, nor is he necessarily an intellectual giant with doctor's degrees and fellowships of learned societies. So the spiritual giant is not somebody that's accumulated so many things. We're talking about material possessions or worldly influence. Like, these are all things that people pursue, that people, they're some of those original 5 Ps of paganism that he referred to at the beginning of this, like things we worship instead of God itself. We're worshiping these material things, these things that we desire in this physical world, right? And it's not the mental aspect of this. It's not the amount of knowledge you've gained. It's not the intellectual prowess you have. It's nothing to do with that, right? His life is the spiritual giant, spiritually big man, is actually the word terminology used. Life is founded on the simple moral qualities of honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Now, for those in the 12-step community, hopefully you're familiar with this, but if you're not, I'll talk about it again. I believe I've mentioned it before, but honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, those are what are called the 4 absolutes. These are the 4 absolutes established by the Oxford group, which was a pre-existing group about spiritual living and spiritual growth and self-improvement, really, that the founders of Alcoholics Anonymous based some of their 12-step program on information from the Oxford group. So these are, and this individual was a part of the Oxford group. VC Kitchen actually, at some point, I believe it talks about in this book, but at the minimum, he thanks the Oxford group at the beginning of this actual book because it showed him spiritual growth. So that we'll eventually get to that in this book. But honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love are the 4 qualities that are called the 4 absolutes that they should mold and shape every thought, decision, and action that you make in your life. That is the comparison that you need to hold everything up against. He does not grow more honest or more pure through increasing knowledge of what is honest and pure. He does not get that way through his intellect at all, nor through his physical prowess and achievements, right? So just learning about it, getting material world respect and everything like that. It's not what living spiritually is about. It's about a principled life, which is new to VC Kitchen, I see. And then he talks about how he had to, how his pursuit of those other things actually have caused him to become less moral, right? Because his intellectual pride grew, his pride grew because of his wealth, financial wealth. It grew because of his prestige. It grew because of his friend groups, because of the social clubs he was a part of, right? So when he gained in those 2 realms, the physical and the mental, he actually became less spiritual. He had less integrity, which is interesting. And I had grown through the years more dishonest, more impure, more selfish, and more unloving than ever, right? So he's completely going the wrong way with all these, which is in the pursuit of living better. So before I could do anything to help other people, something inside me, something would have to be done about it inside of me, is how he said. And some might know the term, it's an inside job with outside help, right? So we can't give away something we don't have. We can't actually teach and help people grow and change and improve their lives if we don't have the direct experience of it ourselves, if you are not carrying that flame of spirituality and integrity with you, your ability to make an impact and help other people is almost null, actually. So it's a very big understanding to have. You can't give away what you haven't got. So he starts contemplating about why, or what am I going to do about it? And he remembers what his publisher said. How do you grow a soul, right? So how? So what needs to be done for the growth of a soul to occur, right? To grow your honesty, to grow your integrity, to grow your unselfishness, to grow your love and your purity. Well, how? And then he goes into the just the principle of growth. There's certain environments you have to, if you want to get stronger, you have to lift weights, right? Physical environment, it has to adapt itself and survive. The mental environment, you have to put yourself around other intellectual people, around people that have similar ideas and are like-minded, or around people that have ideas and information you want to learn and grow from and incorporate, right? So physically, you put yourself in the physical world in a place that will stress your body to the point to grow. And then mentally you do the same thing. So he takes that principle and he applies it morally, right? So, because if you want to grow morally, you have to put yourself in an environment where moral growth is possible, right? Where moral engagement is actually possible, which is interesting, right? I figured that to grow morally, I would have to get in touch with some kind of moral environment, some set of conditions, some atmosphere of goodness, or some moral force which would feed, stimulate, and exercise the honesty, purity, love, and unselfishness in a man, right? So I need to find a place where I can exercise those qualities. And then again, he goes in to say, I knew well they do not grow through self-indulgence. That was his first chapter, is when he was pursuing those 5 P's of, possessions, prestige, power, applause. Oh my gosh, I can't remember them all right now. Hold on a second. It was first. And pleasure. Possessions, power, pleasure, position, and applause. So pursuing those doesn't grow those. And he knows that. That was what all chapter 1 was about. And then they do not grow through thinking. Thinking about them doesn't do anything. Expanding on why they'd be a good idea to practice doesn't do anything. Telling other people why they should be doing it is not it doesn't grow them, right? If they grew in me and became a part of me, I might pass them along to others by example. I laughed at the reading during this, or sort of contagion, as one gives the measles, right? So he's realizing any way he's lived previously and anything he's ever pursued before will not grow these qualities inside of him. And it seems as though he's understanding that to help other people, he has to embody these, and then they'll just catch on, right? It's something that's passed vicariously. It's not taught or demanded of. Right? It's modeled. It's someone's given an example of it, which is you yourself, right? It can't be taught, only shown. They would not grow, the qualities, they would not grow unless I could lay hold of some kind of spiritual environment or moral form of food, air, and exercise. So now he's come to the decision that he needs to actually find a place to practice morality, to practice spirituality, to find a way to incorporate that into his life. He needs to find that environment, that playground, you might say. And he talks about how, even though he's never noticed it before, it might be out there. Because new things, he talks about how new things just pop up, but I have a feeling what's actually happening is he's just suddenly noticing things, because when our eyes become open to a certain perspective, a certain principle, a certain behavior, suddenly we see it everywhere, right? And So it's interesting that when our mind becomes available to seeing it, or our spirit or whatever it is becomes open to an idea, suddenly we're more receptive to finding it. We're able to actually find it, right? Like when we're able to be loving, we can feel love in our own hearts, right? Those types of things. When we're willing to forgive, we find forgiveness for ourselves. We find forgiveness for others, right? So these are the types of things that he talks about in this little section. Just like suddenly things just pop up and just create out of nowhere. And I just think they're just finally noticed. It's the reality of it. So he said, I, in my own career, seem to have passed through two stages. First, the conclusions of self and self-desire, reaching out instinctively for whatever I wanted in my physical environment, not caring what that did to other people or the world. So there's just a completely selfish and self-centered way was the first way he lived, right? And then the second way was an intellectual service to society, right? He was like, I need to educate them on what's good and the growth and become this philosopher that'll actually build on this society that we have. So he was living for self initially. That was his first guess. That didn't work. He started living for society, to better society through educating them on what he believed to be the purpose of life, that growing of a soul, and that did nothing, right? So I then found myself reaching for a still higher stage of consciousness. And since the emergent evolutionist Alexander says that deity is the next quality to the highest we know, I believe that the thing I was reaching for might be no less than a consciousness of God. Now, that might sound scary, but I can tell you this. In the practice of the 12-step rooms, the 11th step is sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with the God of our understanding. Right? So, it's not an unknown practice today, right? This sounds a little bit, where is he going with it? But the reality is, like, trying to actually find that will of God in your own life, or whatever your God is, that God of your understanding, right? Is something many people do. It's many what religious people are attempting to do. It's what a lot of just general spiritual people are attempting to do. Whether you're looking through nature, whether you're looking through a organized religion, whether you're doing it by yourself in the way, whatever way you practice, that's what we're trying to do, is actually become aligned and get in touch with that thought of God, that flame of God within us, that piece of that source and that life. And then he goes on, how was I to achieve this consciousness and form contact with the force that might help me grow a soul? That's what, again, he's like, okay, this is what I've got to do. This is where I've got to go. I have to reach out and I have to actually grow this soul by being in touch with God of my understanding. How do I do that? And he comes to the conclusion, if such a thing existed, getting in touch with God as a means of growing souls should, I felt, fall within the province of the church. So he's going back to the church, right? That he was at earlier on in his life, that he is spottily attended through hangovers up until this point, right? And he talks about how he doesn't seem to be able to find it anymore within the church, right? He goes in to say, I did run across passages that made me feel the writer was in touch with some moral creating force, inspiration, not understand, but nowhere in my understandable suggestion, which told me, nowhere did I find any understandable suggestion which told me how I, too, might get in touch with the same force and experience that this is a hard sentence to read. But nowhere did I find any understandable suggestion which told me how I, too, might get in touch with the same force and experience the things which those occasionally inspired writers described. So he's finding writers, right? Religious literature that also spoke of this stuff, where he seemed to be godly inspired, spiritually inspired, but he didn't know how they got in contact. Still, he's still searching for this thing, right? No instruction yet. And in other words, okay, here we go. Next thing I put on here was to make himself behave. That's right. For example, he said, okay, in other words, I began to see, oops, kick the tripod there. Sorry, we're back in action. Okay. In other words, I began to see where the humanist might be wrong. Professor Irving Babbitt, for example, said that man is vile by nature and must make himself behave. I found that statement hilarious, actually. But my excursion into religious literature, not to mention my experience with broken New Year's resolutions, which I'm sure many can relate to, began to show me that self-management as a corrective of behavior was entirely inadequate. I don't know anybody that's struggled with alcoholism, with drug addiction, with overeating, with any gambling addiction, sex addiction, love addiction, whatever it is. Anybody that's struggled with a behavioral addiction in any way will tell you that self-management doesn't really work that well, right? Me doing it on my own and making myself behave goes as far as I want it to. That's literally it. Which sounds like, well, if you want it to go all the way, it will. I will never, I don't want to say it that way. Of my own strength, I always failed. Right? And that's what he's saying here. Self-will failed him every time. There must indeed be some other environment or force, and I must find it if I wanted to gain any real and lasting satisfaction for myself in life or do anything creative in the world. So he's still seeking. Then he goes and he says, okay, well, he finally picks out a priest he's willing to go talk to. So he sits down, he uses all his intellectual might to pick out a priest he feel like would be appropriate to actually ask these questions to. And he goes and asks the priest what's living for, and the priest actually agrees with him to grow his soul. And then he says, how do you grow a soul? And the priest comes back with, well, how do you? Right? It would be snapped up by every minister I know, right? So he makes another reference to a new set of 5 P's, his publisher, professor, partner, and pal, and now a priest. So 5 people from 5 different walks of life told him what he needed to figure out, but didn't tell him where to find it or how to figure it out. So he keeps running into more roadblocks, right? I felt as though I had run against still another blockade. So he dove into the church even further, right? He started researching it and everything, and he started really digging into where the church was founded from and all of this information and the church, but it certainly did not appear. Okay, the answer it held. Okay, gotta go back a little bit more. I felt at this time that the church, with all its protests of modern knowledge and method, had not really risen from its ashes in the Dark Ages. The answer it held, if answer be, there be, might lie buried somewhere in the foundation of the church, but it certainly did not appear in the 20th century superstructure. I decided, therefore, to go back in history and back not simply to the beginnings of the Christian church, but back to the beginnings of morality. So he's saying the church today didn't have the formula, or the church then, 1930s, didn't have the formula for him to actually come in contact with this spirituality that he was looking for this God consciousness that he was trying to figure out and get connected with so he can have a growth of soul and growth of morality. So he's going to go back further than the creation of the church. He's going to go back to the actual foundation of morality. So he's going to go back and just try to find any moralist, he said. And he talked about how the church lost its purpose, which is interesting because there's a lot of people saying that today. So it feels like this idea is continued on through, right? So I wanted to see, so he goes past the church, though, the Christian church. I wanted to see if throughout the ages I could find any moralist, religious, or otherwise, who had known, used, and could convey to me the secret of applying his philosophy in the actual business of living. Right? So the actual application. We have a lot of knowledge, we have a lot of philosophy, we have a lot of intention, but the application seems failing everywhere he turns, which is interesting, right? So he once told me that for years he lectured upon morals to people. He talks about another person, the professor of philosophy from England that he talked to, and he was in the same situation. He was trying to just instruct people and help them grow. And this is where he first introduced, he was lecturing people who, however well they might mean, so they had good intentions, they had every desire to do these things, but they were still doing badly. They were still had their old behaviors. They still had the results that they were trying to change. They were trying to get this connection. They were trying to get this growth, but still were not able to achieve it. That fitted my own case exactly, and it seemed to characterize my entire age, that statement. They mean, however well they might mean, they are still doing badly, right? So, good intentions, bad actions. Where then could I find a religion or philosophy that worked, and what was the secret of its working? This is where he actually goes into the Ptah-hotep, the Egyptian moralist, who he went back and he read, and this was the first documented, as per his understanding at this time, the first documentation of a moralist individual writing it down, first documentation of moralism, but he couldn't find it actually being practiced or followed anywhere, again, including himself. His words, as far as I could judge, had no more effect on his hearers than those of the lecturer on morals mentioned above, and no more consequences in the course of the world events than my own unpublished article. So he's saying, so this guy, 5,000 years ago, wrote down the same stuff I was writing down, or wrote down similar things of a similar substance, put them out to the world, and didn't have any impact, just like mine. People in those days, as now, were meaning well and doing badly. Right? So they had the knowledge, didn't have the actions to follow it up. Now, this is a really cool thing we come to. Throughout all of history, all of the moralists, in fact, through the history of all the moralists, in fact, I found a singular lack of moral application. Right? We have this set of rules, but we don't have any practice of it. And then he comes, I love this quote from J.N. Larned. I still haven't looked him up, by the way, but I want to see what he actually wrote. But seemed to sum up the whole story when he said, the knowledge of good and evil has been complete in the world from the beginnings of history, and mankind has nothing to learn since but the application of it. So we always fall down as a human race, it seems, in the application, right? This has always been the problem. And it's a fantastic quote. So then he goes into the here and there in history. Of course, I could trace a partial application of morality. This was true, for instance, and this is some big names, right? Abraham, Moses, Confucius, Buddha, Muhammad, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius. These people are infamous for their ethical and moral character, right? These are people that religions are founded off of. The Marcus Aurelius's meditations are famous world round, especially, and the teachings of Buddha and Confucius and Abraham and Moses. These are people that religions are founded on, right? These are huge. These are really big names, but he still says these are only partial application. These only have partial application of morality still. And then he found one. Among them all, however, I was obliged to admit that there was but one, Jesus of Nazareth, who had lived out his philosophy perfectly and completely. He alone meant well and did well in all departments of living. So he probably not finally, I'm sure I have a inkling that he was going to come to this conclusion, but he wanted to research it thoroughly. So his philosophy perfectly and completely. He alone meant well and did well in all departments of living, right? That's a fantastic thing. There's some hope there, right? The only true application of morality. thoroughly was Jesus of Nazareth. He alone was able to impart to his disciples a secret of application, so the actual action of being a moral person, and the same power that he himself possessed. So he was successful. Jesus was the only one that was successful in passing along the application of moral living, and therefore the power that comes with it, which is what started this whole thing. Was he wanted to teach and help people, and he came to the realization he had to first correct his own behavior. Was it the God? Now he goes into the questioning. Was it the God consciousness or the contact with the spiritual environment that I had now begun to grope for? Or was it a tremendous personality coupled with an applied psychology beyond any known today? In either case, how did Jesus develop this personality or psychology? And how did he give his disciples the same command of power? So now he's like, okay, so this is somebody that did it. Not only did he do it, he passed it along, right? Successfully passed it along too. How did he actually develop this? How did he actually embody the integrity and morality of this person? And then the last paragraph was really cool. I was not, however, ready to admit that the state of consciousness I sought did not exist just because nobody had shown me how to find it. Right? So it existed out there somewhere. People have been in pursuit of it for as long as he could find. Christ himself had stated that it was not an easy way to find, and I began to cast about for other means of seeking. He kept looking, and that's a beautiful thing. Is that seeking? There's some literature that says God doesn't make too hard of terms with those who seek him, and I find that to be true. If you continue to seek, you will eventually find, maybe not as quickly as you'd prefer. So, well, that wraps it up for today. The next chapter I want to mention is chapter 4, this business of making character. Science. I wonder what this one's about. I forget. It's been a minute since I've read this book all the way through, so I'm very excited to see what this next one's about. We're getting to it, though. We're getting to some good stuff here, guys. It's not the pursuit of vain pleasure and hollow pleasure for oneself. It's not the education of society, right? It's about moral growth within your own self and within your soul. And we're in the pursuit of trying to find that right now. So, fantastic book. Extremely enjoyable read. And I hope y'all are enjoying it as well. Jump back on with me next week to hear the reading for chapter 4. And we'll see what that holds. So, thanks again for joining me. And until next time, thanks.